Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome to the Solfate podcast, where we have conversations with builders and founders in the Solana ecosystem. Welcome to the episode today. This is a super cool one. This is amazing.
Oh, so much fun. So much fun.
It was so
Everyone
great.
knows what I'm going to say, right? Like new favorite person.
Nick
makes fun of me for it. For real though, Rishi was dope.
Rishi might be my new favorite person. Shit. We had Rishi from Mycelium Networks on the episode today, and phenomenal conversation. We talked all about Helium and IoT and kind of like a bunch of DePIN stuff and how DePIN works. And Rishi and the Helium team, they have built this massive test bed of 1,600.
Well, Rishi and the Mycelium team, right?
Did I not say Mycelium?
You said Helium.
Oh, well, they use Helium. You know what I mean.
Rishi
and the
Just making it
Mycelium
clear
team.
for the listeners.
Rishi
and the Mycelium team.
This is how excited I am for this. This is so cool. They covered 1,600 square miles of northwestern Arkansas with IoT coverage with different DePIN networks. So IoT, they've got 5G, Helium 5G out there, and they have this massive footprint of IoT coverage, of network coverage that people and companies and products can go and test their various DePIN things on. And this is so cool. Everything Helium, like I just switched to Helium Mobile on my phone. I've got a Helium hotspot running over here, indoor Wi-Fi. This is all insanely cool to me.
It's freaking awesome. I will say before we dig into the episode, this is the most excited I've been in a very long time.
Verified.
I know
it's true statement.
I get excited about most episodes, but I feel about DePIN right now the way I felt about DeFi in 2020, which is really what got me into crypto. Right. I am so freaking excited. Rishi is so good at explaining what all this stuff is. So if you're over here wondering, what is DePIN? Why does it matter? This is the episode for you. Before we dig in though, let's talk sponsors. We're really excited to have our first sponsor. We're super excited to be sponsored by Underdog Protocol. Underdog Protocol, if you aren't already aware of them, like they basically surface APIs to make it easy to mint, manage, and index digital assets. They handle the NFT mints for a bunch of names you probably already know, like Solana Mobile and Solflare and all sorts of things. Tony and Kevin are super awesome. We've had them on the show. Go listen to that episode if you haven't. But yeah, we're super stoked to be sponsored by them.
Check out Underdog Protocol. Kevin and Tony are awesome. Let's get to the episode.
Let's get to the episode.
Nothing in this podcast is or should be considered financial advice. Any opinions and thoughts expressed are solely those of the individual. They do not represent the opinions of any entity. Enjoy.
What's your background, over the last 10, 15 years or so?
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of got my start in crypto on accident in 2011. So kind of way back. Buddy of mine, who's kind of more of a computer science guy, he was working at an Apple store as an Apple genius, and he was, I didn't used to hear from him very much, but one day he called me up and he was like, "I've got something really important I want to run past you." And I was a little bit more of a business and finance guy, very interested in economics. And, I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, no, let's meet up and let's talk about this. We sat around my mom's kitchen, and for the next hour and a half, he walked me through this crazy network that was run by computers that was permissionless and trustless called Bitcoin. And I just remember wrapping my brain around it from a business school perspective and, understanding how the Fed works and understanding, the banking system and, kind of everything that we've grown up in and the way that the world operates today, and just kind of taking that, as a little bit of okay, this is how things are. And then hearing about Bitcoin and realizing that something like that actually existed in the world, it very much did just break my mind. And I couldn't forget that conversation ever. I spent the next 3 weeks just scouring the internet for the remnants of like anything that could give me more information about Bitcoin. And of course, back then it was just a year or two old. It was pretty new, and it was just nerds like us that were digging into stuff like that. So I spent the next 3 weeks just obsessed with this concept of a decentralized network, a permissionless and trustless new way to kind of potentially build a banking system. And, the rebel in me was kind of like, all right, we got to do this. And so kind of talking to my friend, I was like, how do we get involved? Like, I'm sold, I'm in, he was like, the network checks out from the computer side. I was like, the economics and the simple supply and demand and mineral extraction, sort of model, that could definitely work. I mean, especially if we start, from scratch, it's a good model to work with. What do we do? How do we get involved? And he's like, we got two options. We can either buy Bitcoin, or we can mine it. And I was like, well, mining sounds like a lot more fun. So we got on Tiger Direct, and I bought $600 worth of equipment. I had just graduated college. I had a job. He was kind of still trying to figure things out. So I was like, all right, I'll buy this equipment. You build it, and we'll set it up in your mom's basement where you're living right now. And so that's what we did. And that summer, so about 2.5 months during that summer, we mined 20 Bitcoin. And this is 2011. So the price of Bitcoin is $12 a pop. And, we thought we were doing pretty good. And, we're sitting around the computer just looking at some stuff. And one day his mom walks downstairs and she is pissed. And she's like, Scott, the bill is $600.
Is this why my electric bill is so high?
No.
Exactly. She's like, this is a $600 electrical bill, and this is last month's bill. Turn that off or get out of the house. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, we got to figure something out. And so she leaves, and he looks at me and he's like, we're screwed. I can't move out. I was like, I know you can't move out. What are we going to do? He's like, well, I got to turn this off. And I was like, okay. So we started doing some math. All right. We had $600 in computer parts, and we had a $600 power bill, and we had another probably $600 power bill coming the following month. So we're racking up the expenses, and we looked at our Bitcoin. We've got 20 Bitcoin. We were really proud of that because we had kind of talked about the future and like, oh, this is going to change everything and all that stuff. But that was worth $240 at the time. And Scott had a big problem on his hands because he needed a place to live. And so we made a deal. Actually, we had to shut down the operation. That was my first business venture, by the way. It lasted 2.5 months, but we had to shut it down, and we made a deal. And the deal was Scott would keep the computer equipment so he could liquidate that. He would also keep the Bitcoin, the 20 Bitcoin that was worth $240. He would work extra hours at the Apple store to cover those power bills of $1,200. And he would take, when he was able to kind of build up some cushion, he would take $600 and pay me back for the equipment. So Scott kept the Bitcoin, he kept the hardware, I got my money back. And that was the deal that we made. And, it wasn't like I didn't really know that Bitcoin, we all thought it would be great and it would be successful. And so on the surface, it kind of sounds like I got the short end of the stick because Scott kept the Bitcoin. He ended up buying himself a nice house with it. He had a nice wedding. I think he still got a little bit of Bitcoin as well. But about a month and a half later, Scott gave me the $600 back, and I went back and I bought like 45 Bitcoin with that because the price was still $12. So all in all, we both worked out pretty well. But that was my first real foray into Bitcoin and crypto. And from that point forward, I stayed in the mining circles a little bit. I followed, just the slow trickle of adoption that was happening back then as more people found out about it. Did some Ethereum mining a few years later. And that's really, when I got that bug put in me, that never left. And it was kind of one of those things where it all goes back to that kitchen table where somebody explained to me how this works, that it could exist and that it did exist. And that's really all I needed from that point forward.
That's so cool. I'm
not
gonna lie.
story.
I'm always so impressed with people who got the vision early, right? Like I feel like it took me years of just like drips of information slowly permeating my brain, right? Before it finally clicked when I actually like interacted with some DeFi stuff on Ethereum, right? Like that's the first time I was like, oh, I see where this could be useful and why it matters. So to be sitting there in 2011 and just from hearing someone explain the general concept of Bitcoin, for you to sort of latch onto that and see the potential there is really, really cool. I love hearing those stories.
Yeah, I mean, I also got to say, I think the timing was pretty important. Like during that time, I just graduated college. I was looking at a corporate job that I was getting ready to start. And I was like, oh gosh, is this going to be my life? Like, do I have to do the corporate thing? Because I'm more of an entrepreneur. I'm more of, I like to kind of do my own thing and try new things and fail at things. And so for a lot of it, a lot of it was I was searching for something. I didn't know what I was searching for, but I was definitely searching for something. And so I was open to a lot, and it just hit the right way.
Nice. So let's maybe shift over more to like mycelium or really just physical infrastructure in general. Obviously, you were doing some hardware stuff early on, right? With mining. When did that transition into what I think, what we now think of as DePIN?
All right. So we'll fast forward to the pandemic lockdown summer of 2020. There was a lot of people.
Everyone's favorite time period.
Yeah. I mean, the further we go in just like time, we'll always look back and like, that'll be like, oh yeah, then, cause that was such a weird time. But yeah, everybody was home. People were getting adjusted to having kids at home and having to work from home and getting bored and not having, be able to go to restaurants and movie theaters and stuff like that. And same thing with me. I was at home, working on my own projects. I was kind of in between projects at the time. And I thought it was a great time to just like pick up some house projects and keep myself busy during that summer. And I kind of regretted it later, but one of the projects that I decided to do was I was going to build a massive rock patio outside of my house and just kind of like bring the property value up and, do something cool and, kind of be like, hey, Mom, look what when she came to visit, and like, look, I actually did something cool. But, it was like moving like 2 tons of rocks and all by hand and laying them and then relaying them and all that kind of stuff. And so I was looking for anything else to do other than that. And so I caught myself taking breaks, running inside, getting on the computer and just digging into this freaking thing called Helium. And I don't know exactly how I found it. I mean, it must have been a targeted ad or, one of my crypto circle buddies mentioned it. But it took me a little while to wrap my brain around it. And I caught myself just running back inside to try to learn a little bit more and running outside, laying some rocks, thinking of something new, running back inside, trying to figure it out. But it made me feel very similar to the way I felt when I first heard about Bitcoin. It was that same feeling inside where it was like, there's something here, bro, and you got to figure this out. And ultimately I arrived at kind of the conceptual conclusion that what Bitcoin promised for the monetary system or the banking system, or, to revolutionize the way that money is transferred, accounted for, through its transparency and through its permissionless system, that 10 years later, I was looking at the same technology applied to something other than money. And in this case, it was data packets or data transfer. The same unit of measurement, transparency, the same permissionless, trustless tracking system, and just a more efficient way to have better control over our data, which has continued to become a bigger and bigger issue. But for me, it was the fascination of applying blockchain to something other than money. That was the thing that got me. And I was like, okay, now this is kind of what I felt like this would lead to, something like this. And so after a couple of weeks, figured it out. There was a 2 token system that took me a little while to kind of wrap my brain around. And once it made sense, I immediately started calling up all my buddies and I was like, yo, I need you to send me some money because I'm going to start a new project. I was like, just send me $1,000. Let me buy some hotspots. I'm going to get these things out here. And I'm in Northwest Arkansas. Northwest Arkansas is a really great place. I'd moved here a few years before 2020. And, it's a nice place, very nice people. It's a smaller place, but there's a lot of towns and cities kind of mixed together that all kind of work and run together. We've got a university. We've got 3 Fortune 500 companies here, Walmart, JB Hunt, and Tyson. And so those are transportation, retail, and food. And so together they kind of create this giant supply chain, manufacturing, logistics powerhouse. And a lot of people don't know, but it's all headquartered right here in Northwest Arkansas. And, secondary to the blockchain and data transfer was the actual network that Helium was building, which was an IoT network, an Internet of Things network, a network for low band, low powered devices that, one of the features of this type of network is because of that low band, the range was incredible. And so it had certain use cases that could be applied to rural areas, large agricultural areas. And it had certain efficiencies that, we really don't think about because we're mostly glued to our cell phones. And that operates on a different band. So I spent a few weeks learning about IoT, and I just kind of looked around and I realized this is the perfect place to build an IoT network. And then that was it. Then it was just like, okay, I decided in my brain I was going to blanket the entire Northwest Arkansas region, 1,600 square miles with IoT coverage. And Helium was going to allow me to do it. And I needed to buy enough hotspots to get started. And that's literally how we started Mycelium. We spent 3 months rolling out the first batch of hotspots. It worked really well. I mean, it was a really cool experience to see, you can see on a computer screen when a node comes online and then it starts to produce blocks or starts to kind of, perform whatever duty it's going to perform. But to know that what we were seeing on screen was actually represented by a physical piece of hardware that was 20 miles away, 45 miles away, and that it was speaking and communicating and working with other nodes that were 16 miles away, 12 miles away, 5 miles away. And so watching the network come online as we were putting these nodes out one by one in the early days was an incredible feeling. I mean, it was really incredible because we watched a node come online and another one come online and immediately start communicating with that one. And then another third node come online and start talking to both, right? And so you had this exponential curve of, productivity, I guess you could say, or the quality of the network communications. And it got stronger.
You could visualize the actual network effect as you just see each of the nodes popping online, just like boop, 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 boop. Like that. That's cool.
And every new node that popped online was inherently stronger than the previous ones because they had buddies that they could talk to, So that was just a super motivating experience. And like living through that, I still remember how that felt. From that point on, it was like, all right, we need hundreds of these things if we're going to blanket this area with IoT coverage. And then about 6 months into it, 4 months into it, I kind of realized, okay, this is not a hobby anymore. This has turned into something that needs to be incorporated. And, we're going to need to raise a little bit of capital in order to actually do what I want to do. So those were the beginning days of Mycelium.
That is insanely
awesome.
Cool. I think, disclosure, I listened to another podcast that you did. I can't remember where, but so there's like some questions of things I want to dive into from the things from that podcast. But to cycle back, can you explain what these IoT nodes are, what the IoT network is, and like what the actual purpose is?
Yeah. So a lot of people don't really think about it. I mean, we tend to utilize for, where our interests are as human beings, we tend to just go with the fastest network that's available. LTE, 4G, 5G. If we want to talk to grandma, across the country and FaceTime with her, we need high bandwidth. That's what our cell phones work off of. That's what allows for streaming video and all that stuff. But a lot of people don't think about it. 3G networks from like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, they're still up and active and they're still used for a lot of stuff.
Aren't they free to use now too? Or close to it?
Yeah. They should be really, really cheap. And it's because it's a little bit outdated technology that doesn't offer the high speeds that people want to really pay for to connect their cell phones. But if you go further back, and you go lower band, so 5G is 5 gigahertz, 3G is 3 gigahertz. If you go back down to like 1 gigahertz and sub 1 gigahertz, you get into megahertz. And so the IoT network is actually the Helium IoT network in the United States is a 915 megahertz band. So it's extremely low band. And so what that means is relatively low power compared to your 5G, cell phone draining your battery in 12 hours. So the devices that connect to this network can actually be online for months and in some cases years without needing a battery replacement. That also points to those types of devices being able to be made disposably, right? Because they're so cheap, so low powered, you can get kind of a disposable battery, and that becomes economical. In addition, your range is extremely long. So as we get into 5G, you got to be a little bit closer to the source. Sub 1 gigahertz, so like the IoT network, we've actually been able to ping nodes 10 miles apart, and that's pretty common to be able to do in certain situations. So super, super long range. So
and that's with relatively small. That's with relatively small pieces of hardware too. We're not talking big cell towers in order to get that kind of range.
Right. Yeah. I mean, from a coverage standpoint, these nodes were like little hard drives with a little antenna sticking up. The devices are getting smaller and smaller, and they weren't like this 3 years ago. But today, there's a product called nano tags, and it's literally a sticker with a tiny little piece of hardware behind it. And it's meant to be stuck on packages that you ship through the mail, or you could just literally stick it on anything, and then it gets thrown out with the box. So these things are getting super, super small.
Oh, and you could have like real time geo tracking on packages as opposed to what you have now, which is like, FedEx told me that they checked in at this place at this time.
It's like Memphis.
Real time.
It's like Memphis and then California. And it's like, well, what happened in between?
Exactly. That's so cool.
That's really cool. I didn't know that those existed.
Yeah. And I mean, you can kind of extrapolate it out into like all these creative solutions that developers and entrepreneurs are building now. Agriculturally, if you used to have one larger sensor that kind of looked at 2 acres and looked at soil, what is the word I'm looking for? The amount of water in the soil, humidity of the air, the amount of sunlight, the temperature, any earth vibrations, just any type of sensor system that, from an agricultural perspective or from a factory perspective. But now it's like, okay, let's take all these sensors, let's pack them into a smaller form frame. Let's, give them a battery life of 2 years, right? Which, that's like unheard of if you're connecting to Wi-Fi or cellular, if you've got a cellular chip backhaul, like that in itself uses a ton of power. And now it's kind of like, okay, well, we used to have one sensor for this particular purpose. Now we can have like 7,000, and they can all be specialized, and it could cost about the same amount of money and give you a lot more data. And so it's basically like, instead of building on Wi-Fi, instead of building on cellular, we're kind of going backwards, and we're just getting rid of all that stuff. And so if you're trying to track a device, let's say a bicycle or something like that, if you're running Wi-Fi, you're going to be out of zone in a lot of areas. So you go with the cellular backhaul, and then you're powering that cellular backhaul, and there goes part of your battery life. If you're looking at like a scooter that you're like rideshare type scooters and stuff like that, what that means for that manufacturer or for that business operator is if you're not hosting battery draining cell chips or Wi-Fi connectivity or anything like that, but you're operating on this like little single antenna, you might have 30 to 40% more in-field productivity, because you're not having to charge it as much. And so kind of all the way down, it's like get rid of the extra hardware that you don't need, skip over all the stuff that we invented along the way, and go back to the basics. And so that's really kind of what's being unlocked right now is things that we know we wanted, but we just ignored them or moved past them because it wasn't economical or practical. Now those things are becoming even more practical and really feasible. So that's kind of where we are with IoT now. Some of the, like, you can get sensors for anything, and it's literally about what problem are you trying to solve? What information do you need? So how do you stack the sensors, on that particular device or asset or out in the field for your particular purpose? And we're in the era now, as this is kind of the second DePIN cycle, which is kind of blowing up outside of just IoT. But this is where all of the innovation is happening on IoT, and Helium IoT obviously leading the charge. And it's just kind of unlocked itself with its migration over to Solana.
This is so cool to hear the way you're talking about it, because it feels. I mentioned the thing that sort of hooked me on blockchain was like DeFi on Ethereum, a few years back, feeling like, oh, there's all these inefficiencies that stem from having, big companies manage the movement of money, where they're taking big old transaction fees to move money between individuals or corporations. Where with DeFi, we can lower the fees significantly, make the transactions more, one to one instead of bridging through another entity. And it sounds like what you're saying almost sounds like the same thing, but like you said, for data packets, right? Where it's like, hey, instead of having to build massive pieces of infrastructure, right, that are incredibly costly to build, and then everybody has to go through these big physical infrastructure, networks built by giant conglomerates, we can go through these very small, very power efficient, financially efficient pieces of equipment to do the same thing with less power consumption, less money consumption, right? Like it's so cool to me because you phrase it as, it's almost like we're going backwards in some senses, but it's because we've moved forward in sort of the network cryptography, like the cryptography side of things, I guess, and the ability to communicate in a decentralized fashion. It's so cool to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that's the power of blockchain, right? I mean, you take out like a big employment center with a ton of people pushing paperwork and communicating with each other, and it's the blockchain that actually powers it, right? And so when we explain kind of what we do to people here locally, or just when I have conversations with folks, a lot of times they ask like, okay, so who are your customers? And that's one of those like kind of like triggering questions because, like as a startup or like, it's like you got to have customers. But I mean, if we build infrastructure and it's open source in a sense and it's trustless, right? In some ways it's kind of like a build it and they will come, because I don't actually know who the customers are. I don't actually sell data plans to the customers. Technically, anybody who wants to use the network can, and it can be anybody and everybody. It could be a corporation down to, a 15-year-old hobbyist who's building, like the next version of a lawn mowing business using some of this technology. And ultimately, those customers that need the data are interacting with the blockchain, just like the blockchain is interacting with us. And, it's kind of like, well, then how do you have revenue? It's like, well, we're actually compensated by the blockchain. Okay, well then who's using it? Well, I don't know. I mean, like anybody who wants
anyone who wants to, and that's the point of it.
Hey, let's have a brief intermission to thank our sponsors. We are super excited to be sponsored by Underdog Protocol. Underdog Protocol makes it really easy to mint, manage, and index digital assets on Solana. It's ideal for developers and startups. They offer gas-free NFT minting, airdrops for tokens and NFTs, and have embedded wallets. You're in great company using Underdog. We use Underdog, Solana Mobile, Solflare, and plenty of others do in order to simplify their NFT workflows.
Yeah, it's so simple to mint NFTs with Underdog that this is our code right here on the Solfate website of how we actually mint the podcast episodes as NFTs. Making a simple post request to the Underdog API. If you want DevNet or Mainnet, both are supported. And you just pass in your authorization token that you get from the Underdog dashboard, and then just provide in all the body details of all your NFT details, and then it mints it right away to the blockchain. Compressed NFTs, the simple API call. Check out Underdog and try it out.
Yeah, so I mean, it's such a cool time to be alive. And one of the bigger, broader things about this, and you mentioned DeFi and stuff like that. It's like things that we just assumed weren't possible, or we just moved in a particular direction, and now this thing happens. Blockchain happens. Blockchain applied to more than just the transfer of money happens. And that results in new business models, and that's one of the things that we've had to figure out is like, how do we actually build a business around this, without any paying customers? So, but it's a cool place to be. And, I mentioned, that first DePIN cycle, which was pretty much, it wasn't DePIN at the time, right? DePIN is like a new thing, but Helium IoT was like DY, decentralized wireless, or, even before that, they were searching for a good name for it. But in the second cycle, here we are. We've gotten rid of the Helium L1. We've, as Noah would say, turduckened into the Solana blockchain, and there's a ton of DeFi.
He loves phrasing it like that too.
I know, I totally stole that from him. I mean, there's no better way to put it. But yeah, so we got tons of DeFi here now, and this is really kind of like one of the most interesting parts of where we are in this cycle. As you know, DePIN is largely happening on Solana. There's a ton of projects. Helium Mobile is really kind of doing some awesome stuff. But as we get deeper into the cycle, I think we're going to see a little bit more of a collision course between DePIN and DeFi. Because if you really think about it, we're dealing with hardware. We're dealing with capital expenditures. We're dealing with building physical infrastructure networks, whether they're telecommunications networks like the IoT network or the mobile network. But then all these other things like vehicle fleets and connecting the automobiles that are not currently connected to the internet, to the blockchain, virtual power plants, I mean, any kind of infrastructure. And one of the benefits of decentralized infrastructure or DePIN is that it allows folks like me to jump in and build my own network for my own hometown, right? For me to be a participant in that. Whereas before it was large entities with large subsidies taking 10, 15, 20 years to build out a network that they're going to end up overcharging their customers for the next 50 years in order to pay for that giant expenditure. And the cycles here are sped up incredibly. I mean, a Helium hotspot, in the 4 years ago, was like $425, $450. Today, they're even cheaper. Mobile Wi-Fi hotspots now are right in that price range as well. And that allows, the democratization of building and building infrastructure, and for everyday people to be a part of it rather than just a few selected entities to be able to, carry that burden.
One might say it's the people's network.
I feel like I've heard that before.
Where did I hear that before?
And I think that like as this accelerates and as there's more companies like ours who are kind of saying, okay, I'm not just going to put this up in my coffee shop and at the bar I go to, but I'm going to pick a broader area and I'm going to do this with a little bit more efficiency and scale. We get back into we do need capital to do that. We do need organization to do that. And it's still decentralized. It still allows little guys like me to do that. But for a little guy like me to have access to capital subsidies in the way that a $1 trillion giant would, now we've got DeFi right here. And, James, like you were saying, that kind of, it's a perfect match. And, we're not quite there yet. I mean, I think it's all on the same chain, which is pretty cool. And so I'm excited for that to happen. But when DePIN and DeFi kind of join forces, I think we're going to see a new boom in how we build things.
Yeah,
100%.
So real fast, just so that I understand the business model, if you will, behind what you're building is effectively we're going to build as big of a network as we can in this area, and we'll be paid by the Helium network for all of the traffic that goes through our hardware. Is that roughly, I'm sure there's a lot of nuance there, but is that roughly on track? Feel free to correct me.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. An even more traditional way of looking at it would be, in some ways we're just a new age mining company. When you think about mining, you're supporting the network through hardware or validation or however you're doing it. And we're operators, in the same right. And so we earn rewards based on our productivity and how we support, the relative impact of what we support that blockchain for. So in this case, it was Helium IoT and building a coverage network that spanned a large geographical area. And we're paid in Helium. Or back then it was HNT, and now we've got the sub-DAO system. So our IoT network is earning IoT, our mobile network's earning mobile. And that's our primary source of income. So very traditional mining from a business model standpoint. But I always like to tell people, this took us 10 years to go from proof of work mining to even doing something like this. And so, for me being an early miner and kind of my brain kind of got set in that way of like, okay, I see opportunities like that. But then recognizing that I couldn't take 400 of these IoT miners and stick them in a basement and run up the power bill just like I did last time. This was going to require a little bit of a different strategy. So I would say 80% of it is still mining. 20% of it is that you're not actually optimizing for energy efficiency or power consumption or hash rate. Here, you're optimizing for quality coverage. And what that means is that you can't put all your hardware in one place. That's the key difference. You've got to spread it around. You've got to actually decentralize your hardware, actually distribute it geographically. And that's what builds the best network. And so that's what we're optimizing for. And really what we've done over the last year and a half, and I think we had this realization pretty early on, was, I looked at this Helium IoT thing in the early days, 3.5 years ago. And I was like, you know what, like this is really cool. But if I'm going to go all into this, I need to really get comfortable with this concept. And I did. And that concept was, if this actually works, right? Because it was all experimental at the time. If this actually works, there will be copycats. If this works, this is how we're going to do things going forward. And so for us, it wasn't really like, okay, let's blanket this area in IoT coverage. It was, let's blanket this area in IoT coverage while we're building out the columns and the pillars and the framework for a new age mining company that can facilitate all the new technologies that will come if this works. And we really did kind of focus really deeply on building out an infrastructure that could support what came to be DePIN. So locations matter. Your infrastructure at those locations matter. Access to internet, access to power, access to line of sight, rooftops, whatever it may be. And then obviously all the things that come with that, which are, well, people own these buildings, people live in these buildings, people work in these buildings. So how do we design an infrastructure that, now we've got, there's 10 different networks that you can stick on your roof if you wanted to. There's 2 or 3 prominent networks that, you can build onto cars. And so just kind of imagining that going out, if you think of proof of work mining, racks can be replaced with bigger racks. Ventilation systems can be upgraded, but you need a warehouse. You need something energy efficient. You need the ability to bring in the new next stuff. And for this, it was just about building that infrastructure. And so we picked this 1,600 square mile area, and we understood this as like, okay, so Helium operated on a proof of coverage mechanism, right? That was their first proof mechanism. They invented it, they spearheaded it, they pioneered it, they developed it. And, now it's still a valid proof mechanism that's been carried over in a lot of ways to the mobile network. One thing that we saw was that with every new network that comes along that tries to achieve something differently, they have the ability to rely upon the previous proof mechanism that's been established, right? And so, that's where kind of composability comes in. Composability of proofs, composability of the technology or the problems that you're wanting to solve, and then ultimately composability of rewards and the data. And so for us, it's a stackable system, and that's why we've really dubbed this as the testbed. If you take something like Demo, for example, they're selling their new device, the Macaron, that actually offloads all of the data that it collects to the Helium IoT network. So here in the testbed, as we have new Demo devices rolling out to cars and they drive around the testbed, they're actually offloading onto our IoT network. So from a mining perspective or a profitability perspective, we're actually earning Demo token for that effort, as well as earning IoT through data transfer. In other ways, you've got other networks that are relying on Helium's proof of coverage mechanism in order to support their proof mechanism. And to get closer to like proof of location and things like that. So, I think that one of the things that we've been really fortunate to do is to really build it out in a way that we can maintain this infrastructure. And for every new network that comes along, they can look at the testbed and they can see, okay, well, good. You guys already have a foundation layer of Helium IoT. That way all of our devices will work. Oh, cool. You guys already have this. That's great, because now our offload will work. And so this has become one of the quickest, easiest, earliest places to go if you're pre-market. If you're working with prototypical hardware, if you're getting ready to launch and go direct to consumer, that's a big step. So for us to be able to provide real world data where the base layer requirements that might not be built out in, let's just say, Boise, Idaho or something, all good with Boise, but I'm just saying, like, pick a random place, and maybe they don't have a network built out as well as efficiently. That may not be the best place to test something that relies on that layer. And so that's why a lot of new teams, and we work with literally everybody in DePIN, from the pen and pad stage to pre-hardware to post-hardware to pre-consumer to Helium Mobile, which is rolling out to moms and dads. And that's a whole nother thing about mass adoption, which is really
rocking
cool,
it right here.
yeah, same here. And so we've really set ourselves up to be a utility for DePIN for many, many years to come. And we're just going to keep on layering on each one of these new networks and kind of opening up the possibilities for unlimited testing, unlimited showcasing, and really seeing what translates from paper to real life.
I want to
insanely cool.
walk back just 2 minutes because you mentioned testbed before we really explained what testbed was. I think the explanation is in everything you just said, which is it sounds like that's kind of the term that you're using right now to describe your network. And it sounds like that's a little bit of an effort to attract the type of user you want today. Like you said, you don't have control over who the end user on the network is necessarily, but also you have incentive to attract users. And you're saying, hey, I've got this network that we've built up in Arkansas. And if you're trying to build devices that work on these kinds of networks, this is the best place to come test those devices out, test out your new use case, et cetera. Come try it on Mycelium Networks in Arkansas. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, we oftentimes we call it a DePIN playground. And that's kind of like the conversations that we have with all these teams. It's like, okay, you're trying to create a product that goes in an HVAC system, and it's a $7 sensor, and it's a pressure sensor, and you want us to put it in 50 random industrial, commercial, and residential buildings, and the goal there is to be able to see, is there coverage in good places? Can we connect to the data offload nodes that we need to? Will it work seamlessly? How does our software work? And this is a really cool idea, but if you're the HVAC guy of a particular neighborhood, it costs you $7 for the sensor. Just stick it in every single one of these HVAC units and set up your dashboard. And if you see pressure drop, then you've got an issue. And a lot of times that's actually all you need for an HVAC system to know that it's struggling or about to go out. And if that business model is based off of early alert systems, then coming to Northwest Arkansas is like, it's a kind of a no-brainer because everything's going to work from a network standpoint. You can focus on your product. Let's say that 2 weeks into it, you're like, okay, we got a bunch of good results, but we don't really want to do this at residential places. So we've got 25 houses. Can we move those to commercial spots? For us to do that in 2 to 3 days, because we've got this big bundle of locations already set and ready to go. We try to make it really easy. For DePIN to flourish, we have to have these sorts of testing zones. And we're getting better and better as the technology is getting broader and broader. People are getting more and more creative with what they're trying to build to continue to kind of expand our infrastructure and what we can offer these teams. Ultimately, we look at ourselves as both an incubator for early stage projects, technologies, blockchains, hardware systems. And then as teams get into the hardware phase and they want results, they want to tweak their testing and get varied results and look at that data and figure out what's wrong and what's right and change it up a little bit. That's what we've set ourselves up to be there as an accelerator and to speed up these flywheels, right? DePIN's all about the flywheel. And if we can accelerate these flywheels, then I feel like we're doing our job.
One of the things I'm really curious about, and you've kind of alluded to it a couple of times, of like, you have 1,600 miles or square miles, I think you said, of total coverage. There's absolutely no way that you guys own all of this land, all of these buildings. So I'm curious about the conversations and like how getting these physical nodes running, this physical hardware running in all of these places to get such coverage, having access to different types of properties, residential, commercial, whatever. So you can have these conversations with like putting this HVAC sensor in 7 houses versus 3 industrial buildings. Like those are very different conversations that I'm sure you would have to have with the owners or operators of those buildings. So I'm curious how those conversations have gone and kind of how that like started off.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It started off with a lot of learning because, this is that 20% that hasn't been figured out compared to the traditional mining model. It required conversations that we weren't ready to have when we started. We didn't know what the stress points would be for people. For us, it was just like, I go to my buddy and I'm like, hey man, stick this in your window. It's not going to use too much of your internet. And he's like, okay, cool. That was the easy part. The first 32 nodes were like that. The next batch of nodes was, I think
when you saturate the friends and family network.
Yeah. And then it's kind of like, okay, how do we get new people to have this conversation with us? That was the first thing. Then it's like, okay, well, you want to connect something to my internet? I was like, oh, okay. I
Skeptical.
can see the issues with that. Oh, my wife doesn't like wires. It's like, oh, okay. How do we make this thing look pretty on your windowsill? There was a lot of learning, and it took us a little while. Probably took us 6 to 8 months to really figure out a good model for what we wanted to achieve. I will say this, most of the industry at the time and still today, I believe, operates on kind of a revenue share model. And that's kind of the lowest friction model. I think most people who buy a Helium hotspot or buy like 2 or 3 Hive mappers and, want their buddies to help them out, it's very easy to say, hey, I don't know how much I'm going to earn off of this or how productive it's going to be, or even if it works, but if it does work, I'll give you half and I get half, right? You get half for doing the work or for hosting it, supporting it. And I get half because I bought the device and I paid for it up front. And there might be a 40-60 or 70-30, just kind of depending on the situation. But that kind of is the industry standard. That started very, very early on because with crypto, it's volatile. You don't know where the market's going to be. You could stack a bunch of tokens now that are worth nothing or a whole lot later, or you could be earning a good ROI with, favorable equilibrium market conditions that you would prefer they stayed that way, but they don't. What we looked at was, okay, we want to build something that is not just going to be here for this Helium IoT cycle, but the same infrastructure that we're building will be able to support everything that comes for the next decade. So how do we get, and one of the early things was like host acquisition was hard because we didn't know what to promise. We didn't know what to tell people. Like, okay, well, how much do you think this will earn? I don't know, like maybe 20, maybe 40. Are you on a hill? I don't know. And so we had to kind of look at this like, okay, we're going to actually try to build a real business. We're going to go to homeowners. We're going to go to other businesses. They don't know anything about crypto. They don't want to know anything about crypto. And before 3 years ago, it was like crypto was bad. Crypto was for drug dealers. Crypto was for like, if you're up to no good, you're doing crypto in your basement. And that was just kind of the general idea. So to knock on somebody's door and be like, hey, I want to put this crypto hardware in your windowsill and I'm going to give you half. It was just, that was not going to work. And we also knew that we weren't trying to do this whole, land grab, like go out and like put up nodes in Connecticut and New York and, New Mexico and just like wherever we had friends. It was very focused. It was a very particular approach at this particular area for the long term. So what we came up with was we've got to have a unique host network that addresses all of the problems that are inherent in just kind of what existed at the time. So we do things very, very differently. And I'm not suggesting that everybody should do this, but for our particular effort, which is to build and maintain this dense testbed, right? That kind of, it's like a city state in the middle of nowhere. So what we developed was something along the lines of a kind of like a traditional SaaS company, but backwards. And we kind of call it a reverse subscription model. So what that means is if I come to you, Nick, and I'm like, hey, I've got this company, Mycelium, we build decentralized networks. It allows for, data transfer or powers your cell phone or, whatever this is. And you've got a business or a home at this location, and we would love to be able to sign you up for this program. And the way that this works is we pay you monthly, a flat monthly fee. You can put that towards your internet bill. You can put that towards business expenses. You can just receive it in Venmo or PayPal, and you can, use it for internet shopping, whatever it is that you want, pay your Netflix bill. But we promise to pay you a monthly flat fee in US dollars every single month. And you can expect that no matter what, as long as you help us keep our equipment online. And we're going to come out and we're going to set up this equipment. We will need your internet. We will need a power source. We may need to be on the outside of your building, just kind of depending on the network. And from time to time, we'll come back and we'll switch this out with newer, better hardware and probably stuff that allows for more capabilities as we get better at what we do. And approaching it that way, we gave those hosts stability, a clear expectation of what they could anticipate. We promised to pay them every month, and we had to do that. We have to pay them every month, whether that location that costs us $25 a month, for example, for that host earns us $4 in token revenue or $4,000 in token revenue. And of course, that changes during a bull market and a bear market. But we ultimately shielded our hosts and the people that we asked to participate and the people we technically onboarded into this whole ecosystem. We shielded them from the volatility of the crypto markets. We shielded them from having to custody their crypto, having to learn about crypto, having to handle the crypto tax side of things. We just basically absorbed all that as an organization and gave people, essentially a flat monthly rate as if it was a subscription for them. And then what we realized, after a couple months is install goes well. Nobody sees like problems with their internet or, power going out or any, no issues. You forget about it after a couple weeks. You get your first payment. You're like, oh, cool, honey, look, it worked. We got a payment. You don't think about it again for a month. You get another payment. You're like, oh, awesome. And then at that point, it's like, try to take it away from me. Yeah. And it's because, it is in a way free money, but I think the promise of this is like, it's all shared resources that you're getting billed for, and you're getting billed, let's say $80 a month for your internet that you're never going to get throttled on. Most people, you're never going to use that much. And you probably wouldn't buy that much if you really looked at it. You would probably get away with $30 worth, but they're going to charge you $80 because of this long time ingrained infrastructure thing where they started this process 40 years ago and they've got government subsidies to pay back. And so they're going to continue to charge more and more. And so, we've kind of, in a way, onboarded people into the ecosystem without having to go through the pain points of introducing them to crypto or having to really explain to them, exactly what's going on. But in effect, we're showing them slowly over time. And so this has allowed us to, the best thing was, it sucks, right? Bear market sucks. But for the last year and a half, things have been pretty tough. We've actually watched the Helium IoT network really suffer, even pre-migration, like hotspots were going offline. And a lot of the reason for this was, the hundreds and thousands of agreements that have been made around the United States and around the world on that revenue share plan. People went from making, a homeowner went from making $40 a month, getting half of that down to making 14 cents a month, at the worst time period.
Because that revenue share model was based on token price and the actual crypto token. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so we grew our host network during the bear market and really kind of close to doubled it over the course of that time. And so I attribute a lot of our success up until this point to that innovative way of doing stuff. But in a way, it's kind of like, was it really innovative or did we kind of just go back to the basics once again? And so, I think we do things a little bit differently here. I think that's very conducive for the type of living infrastructure that we're trying to support. And the more options that we have, whether they're homes, commercial buildings, water towers, fire towers, whatever, the more options we have, the more we can offer each one of these new networks, products, or teams as they work on, hey, what can we build? What do you have available? Do you have something by a lake? And so for us to continue to kind of push that, the numbers of options in our test bed, that's going to be a very important part of our continued growth.
That's amazing. We are we're coming close to time here, and so I want to give you an opportunity. Obviously, like, we've been asking a bunch of questions, but I'm sure there are things that you want to talk about, that you want to get across to our listeners. Is there anything you haven't talked about that you want to make sure people hear before we wrap today?
Yeah, I think the thing that's like the most cool thing to me right now is that all of this is happening on Solana. When Helium kind of announced that they would be looking at new chains to migrate to, that was a little scary, right? Because we were all used to, what do you mean you're going to abandon a blockchain? This is one of the coolest things about Helium is that you have your own blockchain. And Noah would probably be like, oh my God, here we go. But for that conversation to unfold, and we looked at options, right? And it was kind of a community discussion. Ultimately, we settled on Solana. The team settled on Solana. The community got behind that. But before that decision was made, I was doing my research as well, and we as a team were doing our research and trying to figure out where things were going. And we very early on decided, oh man, we hope it's Solana, right? Because if that works, that opens up a whole world of possibilities. And I mean, even surprising to me, now we're seeing DePIN develop, and the vast majority of DePIN is on Solana. And there's so many synergies with that in itself, right? We talked about the DeFi connection, but the composability between DePIN, that's its own thing, right? And so to have all that on chain, where more of these protocols are going to really start interacting with each other on chain, that is really incredible. And, admittedly, I'm a huge Solana fan. I'm a Solana maxi in a lot of ways.
Us too.
And yeah, go figure. But, I'm just excited about the fact that DePIN itself in the industry, that's blowing up. I mean, that is expanding at a rapid rate. It's all happening on this chain. But what that means for Solana, I mean, when we talk about mass adoption, when we talk about integrating, what happens on chain into the real world, there's not a lot of conversation in the DePIN narrative, which is pretty wild right now, about mass adoption and the regular everyday things that are happening. And so I think that a little bit biased, but I think it's one of the best things that's happened to Solana.
That's awesome. I am loving this, and I feel newly inspired to dig in and learn more about DePIN and get more involved. This is pretty much what I told Noah when he was on, is okay, I got to get more involved. And I did to a certain extent, right? And then your enthusiasm drops off a little bit. It's now I feel it's got a new wave of excitement and energy here. So thank you so much for helping open my eyes to what's going on and the possibilities and how cool it is, right? Man, there's so much more we could talk about. I feel like I have so many more questions. There's so much I want to dig into. I would love to have you back on sometime to chat further.
Absolutely. Be happy to.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with that. There'd be so many more interesting things that I'm sure you and your company have experienced that most people just have not yet. Hopefully soon more people will, trying to grow these more region-focused decentralized networks. And that way we can, expand this coverage more broadly and expand it faster and with more capability. So yeah, I would love to have you back and have some more chats.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, let's wrap up for now, and we'll do this again sometime soon. Thanks so much for being here, and to all the listeners, thank you, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.